Yeah, I'll take this shot. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I got to say this, I've been wanting to do an interview with Thomas Kail for many years, so I'm very happy to have him in today's episode to talk about Hamilton on Disney+. Of course, it is the awards season for Emmy nominations. You can't find a more qualified director to nominate than Thomas. Obviously, his work speaks for itself. And I felt very fortunate to be able to interview him about his creative process today. And he was very forthcoming about the history of Hamilton, about what it took to kind of put together a perfect team and to continue to challenge them and to challenge himself all through the process. So I know you're going to dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And if you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue. And if you dig what you see, you could become a subscriber. Just use coupon code SAVE5. It will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. Look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Zoomcast at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page consider becoming subscribers. So thanks for considering. And it is a perfect time to become a subscriber as well, because we are going to have issue 44, our Black Widow issue, hit the stands in just a few weeks. So now is a perfect time to get in. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with director Thomas Kail about directing Hamilton. Hello, Thomas. How's it going? It's good to see you.
It's going very well. It's nice to see you in all virtual backgrounds.
Yeah, yes. I'm stuck in Twin Peaksville. That's been my pandemic Zoom go-to. But I want to go back kind of to your roots and give our listeners and our viewers on YouTube just a sense of your path as a director. When did you first realize that you wanted to direct theater? Were you an actor first who kind of fell into it? Because that's the way that some people go.
Thank goodness, no. The world did not need me acting. So it really, for me, came out of, I think, a search for a community once I stopped playing sports. So I was a kid who grew up playing sports. I played soccer and baseball a lot, mostly soccer growing up. And I really played all through high school. I took one acting class in high school, which was compulsory. So I had to take it my sophomore year.
Right.
And it was interesting to me, not as someone who was keen to be a performer, but just it was a different way to experience the educational process, because there was no one right answer. And that was fascinating. And that, to me, I think probably connected in some way to my experience and love of playing sports. Is there was technique and there was a way to do something. And then there also was improvisation within that. And you weren't just seeking one thing. So once I stopped playing sports and got to college, I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut. I fell in with a group of kids from the theater community there and the very active film department they have at Wesleyan. And there's a lot of student film and student theater. And I was pulled into the student theater. So it really wasn't until my third year of Wesleyan that I ever worked on a play in any official capacity. And I was an assistant director for my friend Anthony. And once I was there, I was like, oh, I think I know where I need to be now. I saw a lot of, analogs, there was like things that were analogous is a better way to say it. So the coach was the director. I could see things in my head, but I couldn't necessarily execute them. But I knew how to get a group of people that had never met and motivate them, rehearsal and practice, the game, and all of that stuff. So that made me feel very comfortable. And that's when I really made the decision in my last couple of years of college.
Well, it makes sense too, because, a production is a team. And it really is a big group of people. So I like this coach analogy. That makes a lot of sense. People sometimes debate theater school, film school, the merits of it. What did you get out of Wesleyan? What was something really important that you did get out of it? Because it sounds like you're obviously a fan. I went to school for theater and film as well. I love it too, but some people really rag on it. But what did you get out of it?
I went to, so a couple of things. One is Wesleyan is not a conservatory, and Wesleyan is a liberal arts college. And I went and graduated with a degree in American history and studied a lot of American literature and did my theater arts really, in an extracurricular way. I only took one theater class in my entire time at Wesleyan, and I took 2 of the film classes there. When you need to take 10 or 11 to major. So I was not even close to that.
Right.
I think it depends on the person. What was really helpful for me about Wesleyan is it was a place through the student theater that effectively taught you how to produce, because they would say, okay, you have a date 3 months from now. Here's the venue. Go make a show. And you picked the show and you cast the show and you marketed the show and you sold the show and you hired the designers. It taught you how to be a producer when you didn't even know that that was a thing that you could learn or a thing that you could do. So I feel like that was incredibly useful once I got out of college and I started a little theater company, and I realized, oh, we might have to rent the venue on 44th Street instead of going to the cafeteria that we converted at Wesleyan. But it was all the same. It was all the same skills that were required, and I really liked the idea of, to use your phrase, like putting a team together. I loved that, and I liked doing that production to production, taking some people with you, meeting new people, as you head into other and new stuff.
Well, speaking of teams, your major teammate was Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you guys met at Wesleyan. What were your first impressions of him? Sometimes in theater communities, there's a sense of competition, but when people put that aside and focus and lean more into collaboration, the fruits could be amazing. So tell us about the early days of kind of meeting up and realizing that you wanted to work together.
Well, I didn't officially meet Lin until I graduated.
Oh,
so
okay.
I heard about Lin.
You met him while you were at school.
I heard about him. So Lin was a freshman when I was a senior, and I wasn't talking to a lot of freshmen, to be honest with you. So in one of those student productions where they had given us the gymnasium, we were sharing our lighting equipment with some kid who was a freshman who was doing a musical. And that kid was Lin. And so the first time I heard about him, he was stealing my stuff effectively. I was like, what do you mean? He's taking our lights every night. So we had to share because, there were only 50 lights on campus. So that was the first I ever heard about him. And then his next year, he wrote a very early version of In the Heights, which he directed in the same student-run theater. And 2 of my friends were still at college, saw it and called me. I had graduated to be an ASM, an assistant stage manager, basically like a PA at this theater company. And so I was driving a 15-pass van with my big cell phone, and they called me one day and I said, I'm the professional. I drive vans. I know things. And they sent me a script of In the Heights and a demo CD, and I fell in love with it. And that was 2 years before he graduated. And I said, when does he graduate? And they said 2002. And I said, well, let's find him when he graduates. And we did. And then we invited him to our little basement theater at the Drama Bookshop in May of 2002. And the joke about it is we had a 5-hour conversation that day that just never ended. It just, we've been talking for 19 years. So Lin and I, we clicked immediately. I had such an instinctive feeling that we were going to be, creative collaborators that were just in sync. I wasn't trying to fix anything. He was this pretty formed person at 22 and 22, I guess, when I met him. And he hadn't thought about In the Heights in 2 years. And I'd only been thinking about it for 2 years. So I had a lot to say. But he heard that my intent was to find out what was at the center of, what was the spirit, and
right.
Try to help actualize that.
Well, so In the Heights is a great place to start, because you were Tony nominated for it, and we could, of course, do a whole episode on it, but we're not going to. Hamilton's going to be the focus. Tell me just one thing that is really your fondest memory as a director from In the Heights, and something that you felt your creative skills growing as a director. And I'm sure there's a million things, but if you could boil it down to one big lesson learned or something that was a new part of your creative habits that you've brought forward since that experience, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think that my experience on In the Heights, which lasted from 2002 until 2011 when the show closed. So it's 9 years of my life. The show was off Broadway in 2007 and on Broadway in 2008. I think that by 2007, 2008, I just turned 30 in the off-Broadway production. And I think I was finally allowing myself to live in a place of I don't know, of not thinking that I had to have the answer or the solution. And what I realized is the director's job isn't necessarily to always provide the idea, but it's to recognize the idea. And so it's about trust and collaboration. And so with the rest of the creative team, with Lin-Manuel and Chiara, who wrote the libretto, Andy Blankenbuehler, our choreographer, and Alex, our MD, I realized that I had so many incredibly trustworthy people around me who had skills that I didn't have, not to mention the designers and, the actors in the company. So it's about, I think, giving yourself space to explore and not feeling the burden of having to have the answer with a capital T and a capital A.
That's a good transition into today's topic, Hamilton. I want to talk about the early days because you were with the project for so long. And of course, what we're going to ultimately be talking about is the Disney Plus version that people now know and see. And it was filmed of a live staged event, which is difficult to do. So we're going to get to that, but I want to start very early on. Tell us about your earliest memories of coming into the world of it. Most people first learned about it when there was the 2009 White House visit, when Lin, sang what became the Alexander Hamilton song from a project he was working on that was currently known as the Hamilton mixtape. And I'm just curious when he first broached the idea with you and how you saw it kind of evolve from that point to the 2013 Vassar workshop version, where there was a bit more of it, obviously.
Yeah, Lin took a vacation from In the Heights in 2009, maybe even late 2008. I think it was late 2008, grabbed Ron Chernow's book, took it with him, read it, and emailed me from his trip. And he basically said, I'm reading this book, and I think it's really good. And I said, okay, cool. What about, it was just like we were just chopping it up. And then when he came back, he said, I think there's a story here. I think it might be a collection of songs. Maybe it's a song cycle or it's a concept album. But I think there's something here. And my job, as a friend to anybody, let alone someone that I've just come out of a 6-year collaboration with, is to say, great, keep going. Follow the impulse, and how can I help? And then he wrote that first song, and he would play it for me and Alex and some of his friends. And when he got the call to go to the White House, and they said, "Do you want to do something from Heights about the American experience?" He said, "Well, actually, I have something else I'd like to debut, if you wouldn't mind." And we thought, well, if you're going to do something about the Treasury Secretary, might as well do it at the White House. And then the first time I saw it, though, was when the filmed version of it came out, because they were filming something for like HBO, and so they had like a really nice 5-camera setup, and they captured it, and then all of a sudden it started ricocheting around the internet. And it was interesting that this one song was finding teachers in California and people in Canada and people in the UK, and something was stirring. And about a year and a half later, we were doing an event for this show we have called Freestyle Love Supreme, which is an improv hip hop show that I started with my friend Anthony from my acting company, and then Lin. And Lin said, I have this other song I've been working on, and it was called My Shot. And we said, why don't we, we were doing this little fundraiser. We were doing scripted material that each of our members had written. And Lin said, I could do this next tune from Hamilton. And so we did it in this little theater for about 90 people. And it went pretty well. And afterwards, while everybody was high-fiving him, I thought it was a good time to try to motivate him. And I thought, wow, 2 songs in 2.5 years, Lin, we're going to be very old by the time you're done writing this. So what if we pick a date 6 months from now, and you write, and we work on 2 songs a month, and let's just see what we have. And he looked at me and he nodded his head, and he was like, let me think about it. Next morning he woke up, he's like, I think I have a venue. And so the first presentation we did was in January of 2012 at the Lincoln Center Jazz, under their umbrella. Right. And we did 10 or 11 songs there. And that was the first time where we had a group of actors and a 4 or 5 piece band interact with an audience. It was a one-night event. And that night was electric. And I think we knew that it could absolutely be a concept album, but there also was some sort of presentation live that should be considered. We were still thinking of it as a mixtape. And then we started to go to work, every 3 months we get together with a few actors. We then went to Vassar, which hosts this, basically I think we were there for like 9 or 10 days, which was just like a lab. And we worked on the first act up there. And then we partnered with the Public Theater. Jeffrey Seller, the producer, had been on board prior to that. And we would just incrementally try to grow it. But we really did it one act at a time. When we went to Vassar, we presented an entire version of the first act, standing at music stands, no staging, and 4 songs from the second act. And then from 2013 to 2014 and 15, we finished the show. So that was sort of how that worked.
And sorry to interrupt, but in a way that harkens back to what you were talking about at Wesleyan, in which you're given a date, you're told you could do it by then, but you have to figure out how to do it. So having that date on the calendar gives you the impetus, the drive to creatively move forward. And it's fascinating that you gave him this 2-month deadline to really get stuff together. I mean, the word from Vassar spread a lot. And I'm just curious, directorially, again, it seems like almost you were acting as a cheerleader, producer, collaborator to get him on that path to getting more songs done. And as you said, it was basically the first act with a little bit of the second act at the Vassar performance. What, if anything, do you remember being important to direct? Or was it really just still a workshop experience of doing what you just said, which is experimenting as the most important way to find your path?
Well, I think, when we came out of that event in 2011 where we did My Shot, I knew that there was going to need to be half a year where he should work. I was like, because in a month, he might not be able to get enough. So it's like, okay, so what felt like a good flag to plant? And so 6 months felt good there. And then after that, every 3 months or every 2 months or whatever it was. And I think that is part of directing. I think it's a little bit of producing, but I think there's some inherent producing and directing. But then, it was working on all the songs. It was helping shape the narrative. It was finding the right actors. It was directing the performance. It was making sure that the sequence of events felt like a story and not just this happened, this happened, this happened. Because one of the things Lynn and I talked about a lot from that Ron Chernow book is a series of events in one's life does not a story make. That's not a story. That's a bunch of things that happened. So a lot of my job was to be there for Lynn and support him dramaturgically as we were building the story, deciding what characters we thought we should hear from, what parts of the story could be focused on. And to your point, in trying to inspire and trying to elicit and nudge and shape and suggest in any way that was going to keep his creative fires burning. That's absolutely the job of the director in those early days, up until, you open the show or up until the movie is locked.
Well, you were really forging your own path because in theater terms, really only 1776, the musical was kind of like the only other touchstone to deal with that period as a musical that was, popular, right? That was still known. And you guys were going so far away from it. Something I've always wondered is the decision to have actors play more than one role. It's commonly done in theater, but it was something that grew out of often low budget productions in which it had a smaller cast to worry about. Tell us, just obviously Diggs, being both Lafayette and Jefferson is the one people cite, but it's all throughout there. There's multiple actors doing double lifting. Tell us how that grew out of the experience.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely connected to old theatrical traditions that probably did come from necessity. And yet also there's something about the theater which allows us to meet a character played by Anthony Ramos, who is Hamilton's best friend in Act 1, and then can play Hamilton's son in Act 2, and then Oak playing Mulligan and Madison. So, and then of course we had Jasmine Cephas Jones was playing Mariah and Peggy. Yep. So we felt like there was also some important and inherent storytelling advantage to that, which is, and you see it in the opening number, like this idea that these three men fought with him, and they fought by his side in Act 1, and they fought against him in Act 2. So that to me felt like we were telling story. This is someone in his life who pushed away everybody. Hamilton was always blowing up every relationship. And there was something about the reflection back of who you were from that first part of your life through who you become, that it felt like we could use those literal mirror images by having the same characters play. And for someone like Peggy and Mariah, Peggy Schuyler, a young woman born to privilege and opportunity, and Mariah given none of those opportunities. And so what were the choices that those two young women have in their lives? And it was a way for us, by having the same actor play it, to ask that question as well.
Yeah, and she was excellent. I mean,
yeah,
really transformative in those two roles. I know people that saw the musical and did not realize it was the same actress playing both.
Well, it's a credit to her now in Blind Spotting on Stars.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting though, because what you were talking about a little earlier was dramaturgy, essentially, which is kind of crafting a story as it's evolving, which is rare. And in Hollywood, it could very often be a contentious process where writers fear and hate studio notes, but you were coming to it as a collaborator, as a supporter. And there's this, danger in which you don't want to give a note that is in any way destructive, because you want the project moving forward, and you want to give a constructive note so that there's a greater sense of exploration. what do you remember about some of the earlier notes that you were giving when the script was kind of being formed as a way to just keep Lin on his path of exploration, but to reel it in so it's not all over? Because as you just said, you're absolutely right. You know, a story is not just a series of events. It has to permeate from character, which, you know, there's three-dimensional characters throughout here. What do you remember about some of the early notes and or interestingly debates that you and Lin had during the screenwriting phase or the playwriting phase, pardon me?
Yeah, I know. I think we had just come off of such a fruitful and trusting partnership on Heights. So we were building from that foundation. And I think that's why we were able to, I think, move relatively quickly, you know, to make a musical really from 2011, even though we started writing in 2009, absolutely. But really from 2011 to 2015 is very fast for a musical. And I think a lot of that is because Lin was just so on target. Like he was just so focused. There's very, very few cut songs from Hamilton. Because if he was writing it, it was, you know, it was hitting the center of the mark way, way more often than it wasn't. And anything that did get cut, and again, there were a handful of songs, were excellent pieces of writing that just didn't fit into the story we were telling. So I think because of that, in some way, there's any of the you're trying to fix or change that sometimes comes with new collaborations didn't even enter into the room. And so I think, you know, what we really talked about was, is this particular scene part of the trunk of the tree, right? Like you want to have the trunk of the tree and you have the branches that go out, but is this a scene that is contributing to what this overall question of our show is? And I think that, you know, we were so synchronized at that point that I feel like we really, you know, we might have, like we never disagreed about anything. We might have been on, well, what about this or what about this? But it honestly felt a little more like we were finishing each other's sentences more than anything else. And again, like I can't stress enough how he was so clear on what the story was. Like every time we put a brick out there, it felt like, oh, that's a brick that's going to stay. And so we went into it with, you know, consciousness of that sort of collective experience that we had all had, and also thought, all right, so then we can go further because we're not spending any of our extra energy wondering where that note is coming from or what the motivation is. We all know it was the same thing. Is this the best and most realized way to tell the story?
You know, I interview a lot of film directors, and one of the things that I don't want to say is a mystery, but, you know, they're filmmakers. They're not all musicians. So when they work with a composer, there is another level that is added to the film for emotional resonance that comes through the score of the song. You had all that covered here. You didn't have to worry about that because this is a musical. Like your music was set from the beginning. But what's interesting about theatrical directing is that some of the emotional resonance and subtext comes from the choreography. And you worked with Andy Blankenbuehler on In the Heights and here, and it's a part that lives a little outside the script because there's so many intimate moments in the choreography that do help move the story, do support the characters, even help for something as simple as transitions. I'm curious what you could tell us as a theater director doing something that's so choreographed, because you know the chorus is on stage for most of the show, and that's a lot of stuff. You know, those are a lot of moves. Obviously your choreographer has it covered, but tell us as a director how you kind of find some of those little moments in collaboration, but also know when to step back and let Andy just do his thing.
Part of team building is about identifying people that can find their way both on their own and collaboratively. And Andy's someone that was very clear because we talked through every song and every character so comprehensively that he could go off to the lab and then show me something that was formed or partially formed or still baking. And I know how to talk to Andy, having collaborated with him for 10 or 12 years at that point, how to go in and try to, again, be encouraging and constructive and always understand from him where the thing was coming from, where was that impulse coming from? Because I work with Andy the same way I'd work with Lin. It's a creative collaborator who is sharing and being vulnerable. And so you want to be sensitive to that always, in the same way that when they walk into the room where you are, that they are with you as you're making and creating. And I also think that there's something that I felt was part of the fun challenge of this is because there's so much storytelling done in the bodies of the ensemble, to your point, throughout the entire show. And they're playing 50 different characters each. We have the principal actors playing two, on the 4 occasions that we spoke about, but you have this ensemble, and from scene to scene to scene, they're embodying, completely different, human beings. So it really changed mostly how I wanted to shoot the thing when we were making the film, because I knew that every time you went in tight, you were missing some kind of visual storytelling. Whereas when you're watching on stage, you're able to take in the picture because you're in a proscenium and you're almost in a master the whole time. And what you do is you focus with the lighting designer and the choreographer. We can tell you where to look in the theater, but you have the opportunity to look somewhere else. In film, you control the frame so much more. And so what I wanted to make sure to do was honor the way that the storytelling, we have a surround, a second level that has a huge impact on how we're telling our story in the theater. And necessarily, if you're in a medium or a close, or even like head to toe on someone shooting a film, you're not going to see any of that. So if you watch the film, and I went through it with my editor, Jonah Moran, we went through assiduously, and Andy was obviously very, very much a part of this, and made sure that we weren't missing the way that the choreography would highlight or underscore, or sometimes provide the subtext, or how those two texts would be in tension, what we're saying, and then what the bodies might be doing moving through space. So I loved that. And again, my joke about this on the edit was, this was the only thing I'll ever do in my life where we weren't cutting for time and asking questions about moving scenes. I knew exactly what the order was. Right. And that actually allows part of your brain to go into, a different room, because you don't have to worry about that stuff. And so that for me was, how do I balance the choreographic storytelling with the lyrical and textual storytelling?
It's always wild when I talk to a film director, because it's a coin toss what they're going to say when I bring up rehearsal, because essentially they're doing 1 minute takes. They're trying to capture a minute's worth of dialogue. Let's be generous and say 5 minutes. You can't blow off rehearsal in the theater because you are doing a 2-hour plus show. How long was the rehearsal when you opened off Broadway? How long was your rehearsal period? And tell us something that was really a light bulb turning on moment for you, because there's so much to discover in rehearsal. What was something that you just remember really coming together in rehearsal?
To your point, and my joke with Lynn about this is, we always say this was the best rehearsed movie in the history of movies, right? Because we've been working on it with that group for a year and a half. But remember, many of those actors had been at Vassar with us in 2013. Yep. And then we did subsequent workshops in 2014. So yeah, it was like it's like Vanya on 42nd Street or something like that, or it's like in like the Russian theater where they would rehearse for 6 months and then only perform for 3 days. So we had discovery at each place. And again, because theater is iterative and it's an accumulation, that conversation we had in 2013 made it in the film in some way in 2016, because it might've been the thing that I had said to this actor, to that actor, and they sparked and took it somewhere else. So I believe deeply in rehearsal. I love rehearsal. And I think that one of the real revelations for me, even before we got into rehearsal for the production at the Public, was when we did our final workshop. We staged the first act and then read the second act, but we did it all together in May of 2014. And that was 100 light bulbs coming on, because it was the first time that we interacted with set pieces, the first time that we tried out the idea with our costume designer, Paul Taswell, of having costumes that harken back to then, even though from the neck up, we wanted to make sure that our characters reflected now. So we were able to see that intersection and that tension worked, and also to get a sense of how the show could move, because we did not have a turntable at that workshop. And David Corrins, our set designer, said, I think it's a turntable, but I think it's a double turntable. And here's what I think it can provide. And David was absolutely right. And so we then instituted that when we went into rehearsal for the production. And I think that by having a turntable, we had the ability, in a very simple example, that you could not move your feet, but still travel, which of course is about the movement through time that Hamilton was always struggling with. This is about somebody who felt they're running out of time initially.
It keeps your actors center stage and allows them to have movement. So, I mean, it keeps the focus going. And, you were directing with these turntables from Corrin's great set, because the bare bones aspect of it is kind of reflexive of the off-Broadway run, but it also really works well for the show. It keeps focus. It feels like there isn't a backstage, even though of course there is. What's fascinating to me is, from what I've read, you guys had a reflecting pool reveal in your off-Broadway under your turntable, and then it was cut for your Broadway show. What was the deal with that? Because I'm just fascinated by it. And I guess it was revealed at the end, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So, David Corns and I would work with our other designers, Paul, who did costumes, Nevin, who did sound, Nevin Steinberg did sound, and Hal Binkley, who was our lighting designer. And we would look at the model in 2013 and 2014, leading up to 2015, and all of us, I like to have all of my designers looking at the same thing, along with our choreographer, Andy, was there all the time as well. And so we would talk about these ideas. How do we create an envelope for the show in the physical representation that David would make, that felt like it gave us the things we needed, but it did not get in the way of the propulsive nature of the storytelling. The only thing that can move as fast as Hamilton was light. So we knew that Hal Binkley was going to be the person who created space for us, not us flying in lots of things, not lots of automation. We wanted everything to be motivated by the performers, meaning that they were doing all of the moving of furniture, because this was about a country that was built by people, without a lot of technology. So we wanted to keep a fundamental rudimentary feel to our set. And I think David has created an ingenious set that sort of doesn't in some way get the full credit it deserves because it looks so simple. But I think it's a real marvel. And so I feel like once we were then moving into those next conversations, we thought, all right, well, in some way, this show is a monument to the past. What we're doing is trying to pull the past into the present. And so I grew up in the DC area, and there were lots of reflecting pools. And we thought, what if in the center, we revealed a reflecting pool, and the final image of the show used water as a way to evoke that. And so we did it for actually, I think, only 4 previews downtown. We did it on the first night, and we had staged it, and it looked beautiful in the final image, but the getting there was not quite as elegant. And as soon as we did it, that first performance, I knew that I had to cut it. But I also knew that David and his team had been working on it for a long time, and it was from an idea that we had had. And I wanted to respect that, and like, let's try it a couple more times and see, although I knew that it was probably not long for this particular world. And I think that the thing that I said to Lynn, and I said to the rest of the designers and to the company, is it's asking a question at the time when we don't want to be asking another question. And so it felt like at that moment, the revelation of that, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. It was too much to get there. And it was really a vestige of an idea we had. Like, what if we flooded the whole stage and you had the actors standing on what looked like deep water, like in front of the Washington Monument? And of course, that was completely unfeasible in terms of practical application. So it ultimately became this small reflecting pool, and then went away, and it did not travel with us beyond that 4th preview off Broadway. And there's about 290 people that saw the show a night. So I think about 1,200 people saw that, but now like 40,000 people claim to. It's very funny. It's like, I was there when there was a reflecting pool. Of course. But it was just those 3 or 4 performances.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you about Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, I hope you check us out. We have a free issue that you could read. And if you dig what you read, I hope you consider becoming a subscriber. And if you do, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That'll save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. It'll give you access to anything new that we produce. And by the way, issue 44 is going to be our new issue. It's coming out in a few weeks. It's going to have a Black Widow cover, a lot of great stuff in it. So now is a perfect time to get in as a subscriber. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my YouTube watchers of these Zoom casts at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, and my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify become subscribers of my passion project. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with director Thomas Kail about bringing his stage production of Hamilton to life on the screen. I want to get to the filming of it in a second, but it's interesting because when you went from off-Broadway to Broadway, there were a few numbers that were cut and then kind of a revision of One Last Time. And you would think that this thing that is selling out, so popular, ready to go to Broadway, most people would say don't touch it. But it's good that you guys had the wherewithal to let the project continue to evolve and to be critical and constructively critical and honest about it. Tell us about those decisions of what was cut and why.
Well, most of working on theater or anything, or film or television, is at a certain point you have to put your pencil down and you've run out of time. no matter how much time you have, right? Rehearsal or post-production is like closet space. You use whatever you have and you always want a little bit more. And so when we opened off Broadway, we had to put our pencils down, and there were still about 20 more things that we hadn't gotten to. And then there were things that we learned through the course of watching it over and over and over again that we realized we could sharpen or deepen. One Last Time is a great example of that. It was called One Last Ride Downtown. And what we did was get a chance night in and night out to see what was playing and what wasn't playing. And we realized that there was an element of that as a sort of thematic idea that made sense in that moment. But there was a larger gesture towards George Washington that took it from just one last ride to the last time we would see him, the last time he would be our president. And there was a whiskey rebellion in 1794. It was squashed by Hamilton and George Washington, who put their uniforms back on and rode out. And that was in the off-Broadway version. And it just felt like a left turn, and we didn't need to be there. And so that was excised, and lots of other things in that number were changed. So it's just part of the natural evolution. I think we have to keep on pushing each other and yet trust that if something's not broken, we don't have to put our hands on it just to say that we did. But there were things we knew that we could deepen and sharpen. And so we were buoyed and encouraged by the reaction. And it didn't make us trepidatious about it. We weren't worried about it. The thing was so strong. We knew we weren't going to break it. And we also knew this is the time to do it, because once you open on Broadway, that is the show. And there is no more work to be done. And you have to put the pencil down forever.
Well, it's interesting because, you do reference the Whiskey Rebellion in the song still between, Jefferson and Hamilton when they're having the dueling mics debate. So it is, there's still a trace of it mentioned in there. But Here's what's fascinating. So Christopher McQuarrie brought me out to New York in 2015 to do a Q&A screening of Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which was just a blast. And I came to New York a couple days early, and this is July of 2015. And I had been seeing bits and pieces of what was becoming Hamilton. And I'm like, I'm going to go. I'm going to get a ticket. No problem. I got a 125 ticket, fifth row, something that, nobody would be able to do very soon thereafter. And I saw it in late July during previews, to the point where I was so blown away. I went out to the lobby during intermission. I'm like, could I get a soundtrack? Could I get anything? And they're like, nope. There was nothing to buy.
There was nothing out there, right? Yeah.
I think there was a hat. The soundtrack came out in September. It went on to become a phenomenon. What you guys did was absolutely brilliant by filming it in, as you had told me earlier, I guess it was towards the end of the official first cast run in June of 2016. And it's, I love theater, and I'm a subscriber to Broadway HD along with Disney Plus, of course. And look, you go through some of those recordings on Broadway HD, and some are great and some are not. Some are just recordings. It really takes something to capture a performance. So when you knew that you were going to direct, and you had directed some television previously, what were some of the tenets that you set for yourself to accomplish in capturing Hamilton on screen so that it became an emotional piece of art, which you truly were able to do, which is rare for a stage production, versus just a recording? And how many nights did you film it over?
So we filmed it over 3 days. So a Sunday, a Monday, and a Tuesday, the 26th, 27th, and 28th of June of 2016. So on the Sunday, we filmed a matinee with an audience. And then we did some pickups on stage where we got on camera. I think we might have done like Wait For It that night. And then the next day we were in without an audience. And that's where we had Steadicam in, and we had our dolly, and we could have a crane. And we did like 11 or 12 of the numbers. There's 46 total numbers in Hamilton. So we knew that we would only have to, we'd only be able to pick and choose. So we did that. And then we filmed a little bit on the Tuesday morning without an audience. And then one more performance on Tuesday night. And then that was it. So all of that was captured in that period of time. And as you know, having that perimeter made us more creative. Like that was the time we had allotted to shoot it. So it forces you to prioritize and really think about what you want to try to capture. And we knew we weren't going to go back and reshoot, because 7 days later, 10 days later, many people in that cast were going to be gone, not to return. So what I thought was, how do we use this opportunity to give everybody the same seat? That's what film can do. And so I really was excited to work with Declan Quinn, who was our DP, and think about how to honor the show, honor the fact that it is happening live. So there's a lot of sustained takes. It's a show that we shot with 6 cameras on the Sunday, Then we did the specialty stuff. And then we had 3 fixed cameras also. So there were 9 total cameras on the Sunday and the Tuesday. Wow. And we changed all of the locations of the 6 shooters on the Tuesday, but kept the 3 fixed, which was an overhead, like a reverse. And then that one that's a reverse, like when George Washington enters, like that's, that sort of fixed camera that we put into the thing. Well, so really 6 and 6.
So one of the things that you'd already accomplished as a director was such fantastic transitions between your numbers. So part of your job was already done, editorially in camera just by having these fantastic transitions. But I'm curious about your editing process, because you're taking sound from night 1 and putting it sometimes with picture from night 2 or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. How long was the editing process? Because most people think that you're capturing one show, but as you said, of course, you're getting Steadicam when an audience isn't there, and you're capturing these very intimate, up close and personal moments. What were the challenges during editing?
Significant. But as I mentioned, not time and not order and not story. So to take that off of your brain allowed you to just sift and sort. I mean, think about how many, if we did 3 or 4 takes of 13 numbers and then had the 2 live performances, the multiplicity gets high of like how many options you actually have. And so Jonah Moran and I sat down, really we shot in July. I probably first started sitting with him in August or September of that year. And then I would just go and check in with him. I mean, at that point I was putting up another production of Hamilton and then casting for London. So I had sort of 4 versions of it dancing in my head, right? There was the one captured in amber that we were looking at, from the original company. And by the time we were editing it, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them had already left. So that was already a recent memory. And then we just took our time because we were making it independently. We didn't have to adhere to any sort of timeline. I think by the end of the year, we got to a rough cut of Act 1 and showed it to Lynn. And he was very excited and encouraging. And then over the next 6 months after that, into 2017-ish, we finished. And then I would say we probably had something to share at the top of 18. But again, I was in there twice a week, or then there would be 3 days I was available. Jonah was cutting, and I was sort of flying around, and then would come in and watch and sit with him. And then we would have some experience where we had real chunks of time where I was there for a week, or, there for a couple of weeks. And then we had something that we felt was representative of what the show was. And then we went back once we knew we were going to come out on Disney Plus, and did a lot of fine tuning. The show was basically sound, sound was pretty locked in, as was color. But this was in the absolute early days of the pandemic, where this is actually the iPad. Now that I've figured out my eyeline, this is the iPad that I finished doing my color correcting for Hamilton on. And one of the things that was amazing is, we'd be on the line with our color corrector in New York. I'd be here, my editor would be on a different one, and my DP at home, and we'd be talking on phones or FaceTiming. And that's how we finished color correcting, because this monitor is actually an exact match. And then sound was a little trickier, because how do you do Atmos with headphones? But we figured that out too. And so we did that sort of final push in the beginning of the pandemic. So April, May, I think we had to turn it in May 22nd to then be QC to come out on July 3rd.
Most people consider Hamilton just a complete success. They think it was easy street all along. I think it's important to remind people some of your toughest moments. And I'm curious, both in your stage productions, but also in the filming of it, what was your toughest scene as a director? On the stage, what was a time where just everything went wrong during a performance, and you're like, all we could do is just get through it.
How long is this podcast?
Sorry to interrupt, but then especially also while filming it, what was your toughest thing to crack as a director too? So I just want to sneak both in there, the stage and of course the filming of it as well.
I mean, I think in some way the Helpless Satisfied section, that suite, is probably the most complex. Obviously it's a tremendous amount of choreography. And so it's something, where, Andy's physical pattern and physical vocabulary was really driving that. But to learn the first one without the second one, especially when we were doing it that initial time. So it's not like there was anything to refer back to. And we were learning it not on a turntable. So they had to learn it in 2 different ways. And they'd be like, oh, but now actually you're not here, you're here. That was pretty mind-bending. And it always is, even with the turntable, but that first time was in particular. And I think that, that sequence when Angelica stops time also sets up the final duel, that's our bullet time, right? That's our reference to the Matrix. And so those 2 moments at that point, we're sort of just proceeding in a linear way. And then we stop and we rewind and we go back. So I wanted to make sure to try to capture both of those numbers in the film version in a way that honored the stage version. Because I know for a lot of people, it was something that we've never done, like on like the Grammys or the Tonys, that section. Like we always want people to experience it in the envelope of the show, whereas the opening number pulls out a little more readily and feels like something you can, put in a different arena and it will still work on its own. But those 2 numbers need each other. And so what I wanted to make sure to do was find a visual language for Satisfied that felt filmic. And it's actually probably one of the more stylized editorial sections. When we go inside her head, it gets rather non-literal. And in a way, like that was more subjective than a lot of the other editorial patterns that we had found. And it was a big swing in the context of this, particular piece, but it felt like it was an opportunity. And I think it paid off. So that was something we spent a lot of time talking about, that particular transition from helpless into satisfied.
It certainly paid off both on the stage and on the screen. People forget that it was really a communal experience when it came out on July 4th of 2020 on Disney Plus. We were in the pandemic. Everybody was at home. You could just hear like different households. Like I was out on a walk and I would hear different people watching it as I was walking down the streets here in Los Angeles. And it was really wonderful. I mean, you broke all records with the musical. It sold for 75 million to Disney Plus. And you guys were just sitting on it. I believe it was originally going to come out in 2021 so that your stage shows had more time to kind of permeate in the world. But moving it up by a year, just a genius decision by Disney Plus. It was really something everybody needed. And coming out in 2020, especially during election year, was fantastic too. I'm curious, looking back on it, what was your biggest lesson of this film adaptation? What was something that really stuck with you, in which it was your final recording of that cast? So there was a sense of closure, but it was also your last time as a director to do something with them. What was a moment that you're really proud of that you got on film that only you would know about? We wouldn't.
I appreciate you also acknowledging the partnership of Disney throughout all of this, who, pulled a movie up 14 months, very quickly, and just made the platform and the resources so available to us to pull this off. And, I made this as a love letter to our company and to our crew. I really did. And so one of the things that I really dig about the movie, and was something I was actually probably as excited for the cast to see as the actual film, because none of them had ever seen themselves in it, even if they'd seen a production, was the credit sequence. I thought it was really important for our show, which is so ensemble based, to let everybody be recognized. And so when we had a chance to share it with the company, it felt very gratifying to see that our company, every member of our company, saw in that gesture, hopefully, how much we appreciated and acknowledged their contribution, because it was essential. Every single person on stage is essential. And sometimes film credits don't always make you feel like that, because they're like squished into a thing, or they have to go there before, like there's like an ad for a car. And so we really wanted to take our time with that and let that live and be appreciated.
And I think that was fantastic as well. The other thing for anybody that's watching the credits that's kind of revelatory is there is a lineage of music rights revealed in there, in which the songs are playing, and it says inspired by a bit from this song, and it's all laid out. I hadn't realized some of the traces that were acknowledged in the credits. So that was fascinating. Yeah. I guess a way to end on In the Heights came out a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a beautiful film adaptation. And, I know you lived with it for so long. It was probably fascinating for you to see it through someone else's lens. Could there ever be a version of Hamilton like that down the line, in which it's shot outdoors, on locations, and has that kind of hyper real feel? I absolutely love this production because it captured the spark and the energy of this Broadway production. Of course, I think it could lend to other things as well. And I'm just curious if that's ever been discussed with you guys.
I mean, everything has been discussed with every possible form of this, and obviously that's a conversation for down the line. I know that for us, and I'm not trying to kick the can on it too much, because the short answer is that is possible theoretically. Who knows? Sure. But what we wanted to do was try to honor both film and theater simultaneously in this, and And I think this felt to us like the best way we could capture what it felt like to be in the building in June of 2016, and to memorialize that company, that cast. I look back constantly, at that time and think, I can't believe we were all in the same building. Like, just every single person in that company, the people off stage were so talented and just like, the finest at what they do. And this show brought us all together for that moment in time. And so I'm really proud that we were able to preserve that and share it.
Well, look, this is not a recording by any means. This is a moving, living, breathing experience, and you brought the stage to the world. So I want to congratulate you on such a great film adaptation of Hamilton, and thank you for being so generous with your time today.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, and you clearly are a person that loves theater and film in equal amounts, and so I knew we were going to get along. So thanks for making time.
Thanks, man. I can't wait to see what you do next. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to director Thomas Kail for being so generous with his time and talking about bringing Hamilton from stage to screen. And of course, he is eligible to be Emmy nominated for the amazing direction that he did. And folks, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also remember to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. If you've never read us before, you could read our free issue and test drive us. And if you like what you read, you could use discount code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription to Backstory Magazine. It's a perfect time to get in because, issue 44, which is going to be our Black Widow issue, is coming out in a few weeks, and it's going to be a great issue. And look, there's a lot of things that you could explore about our past issues and our archive over at backstory.net and learn more about us. So it would really mean a lot to me to have my iTunes and Spotify podcast listeners and my YouTube watchers of the Zoomcast over at the Backstory Magazine YouTube page become subscribers. So thanks for considering. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2021. All rights reserved. And folks, if you want to get a hold of me, you could reach out anytime. You can find me on social media. I'm Yo Goldsmith on Twitter. And also I run the Backstory_mag account for Backstory Magazine on Twitter. I use those same handles for Instagram as well. I'm not on Instagram as often. I got to get on there more. And there's going to be a posting of some really nice inside art from the magazine as well. But you can find me as Yo Goldsmith on Instagram and Backstory_mag running that account on Instagram as well. And, you can write in if you want to backstoryletters@gmail.com. I promise to not respond to you immediately. It just takes some time to sift through that inbox, so I apologize about that. But you'll get a response one of these days. I also have a Facebook fan page. I don't use it that often. You could always connect there too. Look, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.